What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Power Gamers Tactics Room. I'm your host, Bill Braun Bafflestone. So today we're going to be picking up the Fighter series, this time looking at the Samurai. So today we'll have a review and rating series, just to get a sense of the Samurai and how it stacks up against the other fighter archetypes. Then tomorrow we will do a deep dive series to look for optimization leverage points. And the day after we'll be doing a character build series where I show you how I would build a Samurai levels 1 through 20. Before we begin, I want to thank all of my Patreon supporters. It's extremely inspiring to have that kind of financial support, and it's cool to talk to all these guys in the Discord, so feel free to check it out if you want to support the channel. That said, let's take a look. So at 3rd level, the Samurai gets 2 powers. One is a bonus proficiency, your choice of history, insight, performance, or persuasion, or you can choose a language instead. And they get Fighting Spirit. 3 times per day as a bonus action, they can gain advantage on all attacks on that turn, and it will grant them temporary hit points. 5 when they get the power, and it bumps to 10 at 10th level and 15 at 15th level. So the proficiency is for role-playing only. I will go into more depth about that in tomorrow's deep dive. And Fighting Spirit is unusual for a fighter, as it's a long rest to refresh, and the number of uses doesn't scale with level. They are not going to get a significant uses bump until level 10, so that actually makes this archetype pretty backloaded. This power is a good offensive ability. It synergizes well with Great Weapon Master and Sharpshooter and Action Surge, and the self-generated advantage on attacks is pretty cool. That's rare and powerful in 5th edition. Although you only really need it if there are no other means in the party of generating attacks at advantage, like restrainment, blind fighting plus obscurement, flanking, etc. And we do have to point out that it's unimpressive compared to what the Battle Master can do. They can use Quick Toss Net and Trip Attack, and that's going to gain them advantage on all of their attacks, but also for the party. And they can do it 4 times per short rest versus the Samurai doing their Fighting Spirit 3 times per long rest. And superiority ties are more versatile. So they do have to hit to get these effects to go off. But that said, it does seem clearly better to me than what the Samurai gets at 3rd level. Even though the temporary hit points are a nice defensive bump in Tier 1, it does fall off a little bit in Tier 2, but once they get to 10th level and it bumps to 10, and they get 1 per battle, then it can be really nice. But level 10 is a pretty long time to wait. As such, when I look at the Samurai 3rd level power suite relative to all of the others, I only consider it an average. I think the Battle Master, the Echo Knight, the Eldritch Knight, the Psy Warrior, and the Rune Knight are all clearly better. I mean, it's not close. And the Cavalier is the only one that is in a similar tier, and only the Arcane Archer, Banneret, and Champion are worse at 3rd level. So average, but not a high average. It really seems to me like the 5 archetypes in the better column are the premier archetypes for fighters, and the others really don't hold up in terms of their 3rd level power suite. At level 7, the Samurai gets Elegant Courtier. They add their Wisdom modifier to Persuasion checks, and they gain a Wisdom save proficiency, or Intelligence or Charisma if they already have Wisdom saves. So this is pretty solid. Wisdom saves are the worst to fail in the game, so gaining proficiency in it is fantastic for a fighter, as they have that big Wisdom save hole. It's essentially a free feat, essentially a free resilient wisdom, and that's really nice. A Samurai is going to be pretty resilient against spells compared to other fighter archetypes. And Persuasion is an important skill, so it's nice to get a bump there, particularly if they chose it with their 3rd level ability. And so it kind of encourages the Samurai to not dump Wisdom or Charisma. I personally would probably favor Wisdom over Charisma because it's more defensive, but Charisma is better in the interaction phase, so I can see you going either way. Regardless, I love the 7th level power. I'm defensive oriented. I think getting that Wisdom save hole is fantastic. And so I give the Samurai a rating of good for their 7th level power. I think only the Psy Warrior is in a similar tier. I think only the Eldritch Knight and the Rune Knight get better 7th level powers, and all of the others are worse. At 10th level, the Samurai gets Tireless Spirit. always start combat with at least one fighting spirit. And this is superficially similar to Relentless and Ever Ready Shot, but it is better because it is applied to a long rest refresh ability, whereas the others are applied to short rest refresh abilities. So this is going to add more uses of fighting spirit per day than Relentless or Ever Ready Shot would offer more uses for their respective archetypes per day. It also comes online 5 levels earlier, so that's nice, although I will point out that that's something they need to come online earlier because the others refresh on a short rest. But if we assume 5 to 6 combats per day, that's going to be an additional 4 to 5 uses per day, so that's significant. Plus, this is the level at which your temporary hit points bump from 5 to 10, so stacking that with a significantly higher number of uses per day is a pretty solid bump in temporary hit points. So really, at 10th level is when the Samurai really comes online. Up until now, they've really had to hold off on their fighting spirit only 3 times per day, probably saving it to use with an action surge after a couple of short rests. So a really impressive burst for 1 round per combat 3 times per day is not that amazing in tiers 1 or 2, but now at 10th level, it starts to look impressive. Overall, I give the Samurai's 10th level power a rating of average. I do think the Champion, the Echo Knight, the Eldritch Knight, and the Psy Warrior get better powers at 10th level. The Cavalier is in the similar tier, and the Arcane Archer, Banneret, Battlemaster, and Rune Knight all get worse powers. At 15th level, the Samurai gets Rapid Strike. Once per turn, when taking the attack action, they can turn advantage on attack to 2 separate attacks. So basically an extra attack. It's always on with unlimited uses. So great synergy not only with their own abilities, but with party-generated attacks at advantage. This should generate a lot of extra attacks, so excellent DPR bump. I'm sure the Samurai is going to be very excited to be doing all this extra damage. So I give their 15th level power a rating of good. I think it's similar to what the Cavalier gets, and only the Psy Warrior and the Rune Knight get better 15th level powers, and all of the others are worse. At 18th level, the Samurai gets Strength Before Death. Once per day, as a reaction, they can take an entire extra turn when reduced to 0 hit points. So that is interesting and impressive in that it completely interrupts the enemy turn, and a full extra turn is nice. For lots of extra attacks, you can use Second Wind or Fighting Spirit to get up 0 hit points. And while I never turn down a quasi-death ward, especially one with so many teeth as Strength Before Death has, I have to point out it's not going to be used often. As a capstone, I am much less impressed and can't rate it as highly as abilities that will be employed more frequently because I hope you're not getting knocked down to 0 on a regular basis. I mean, this is a super impressive ability in that moment. I just don't see that moment coming up very often. And so I give the 18th level power a rating of poor. I think only the Banneret and the Rune Knight get similarly bad powers, only the Battlemaster is worse, and all of the others are better. Even though it is really impressive in that moment, I don't think it's going to impact you over the course of 1,000 battles as much as these other powers. And so overall, when I look at the Samurai power suite relative to all of the other fighter archetypes, their powers come in at average, good, and poor. And so overall, I give them a rating of average. Again, the Battlemaster, Echo Knight, Eldritch Knight, Psy Warrior, and Rune Knight seem to me to be clearly better than the other archetypes. Samurai and Cavalier are probably the best of the others that are available, but I don't think they're really anywhere as good. And they're lucky that there's an Arcane Archer, Banneret, and Champion out there, which are just even worse. So the Samurai is an average. They have a very interesting power progression. It's very backloaded. Most play is in tiers 1 and 2, and in those tiers, I feel like the Samurai is going to be a little bit uninteresting. But we will go into that more in tomorrow's video when I do a deep dive and look for optimization leverage points. So that's it. Those are my initial impressions of the Samurai. Seems to be a pretty straightforward class that is slow to come online, but ultimately can generate a considerable amount of Nova damage. So it'll be interesting to take a look at it more deeply tomorrow in our deep dive series video where I look for optimization leverage points. And I'm already thinking about ways that I might want to put together a samurai for the character build series. So let me know what you think about the samurai in the comments below. And regardless, thank you so much for watching. This has been the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Power Gamers Tactics Room. I'm your host, Bill Braun Bafflestone. See you next time.